Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Tuesday, it's November 5th. Today is day 396. There's a lot to pray about today, a lot to update you about today. Of course, today is election day here in the United States. Americans head to the polls to cast their votes. Vice President Kamala Harris, former President Donald Trump. They each need at least 270 electoral votes to win the White House. I won't go into much detail about that. Both perspectives towards the Middle East, up until this point at least, have been quite problematic. Of course, we'll be paying close attention. Gazans fear that neither candidate in the US election will help them. In the West Bank, neither Palestinians nor Israelis have much enthusiasm for Kamala Harris. In Iran, Donald Trump is seen by many as having been disastrous for their country. Some hope he might be more open to negotiations in a second term. And many analysts have been saying that Prime Minister Netanyahu has been holding out to the US elections in the hopes that former President Donald Trump will return to the White House. In Israel, there was breaking news today. Prime Minister Netanyahu fired his defense minister, Yoav Gallant. I looked up when this happened in mid-September. Netanyahu was talking about firing Gallant and, replacing and shifting things around, but it actually happened today. So he has been going to battle Netanyahu and Gallant over the conduct of the war in Gaza. Netanyahu named Israel Katz the foreign minister. And it's been said that Gideon Sa'ar will replace Katz as the foreign minister. So, Israel Katz, who's been the foreign minister, is the new defense minister. So it's been kind of a shifting of things around. At the height of the war, complete trust is needed between the prime minister and the defense minister, Netanyahu said today. In recent months, the trust between me and the defense minister was damaged. I'll talk more about Sa'ar. Again, I gave updates about that on September 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th. There was a lot of talk about him moving into becoming the defense minister. So it's interesting that he's the foreign minister instead. But we'll talk about implications in that regard in coming days. I'm at the airport. I'm headed to Amman. Met with the Egyptian ambassador today. There is a question of whether or not Iran will counterattack Israel any day now. Yesterday, I shared how an Israeli official was accused of having leaked classified information in an affair that is now being called Bibi leaks. Bibi, of course, is Prime Minister Netanyahu's nickname. An Israeli court approved the Shin Bet request to extend the arrest of Prime Minister Netanyahu's spokesperson, Eli Feldstein, and another suspect for 8 days in connection with that affair. An Israeli court sentenced the Muslim leader Jamal Mustafa to 3 years in prison for calling Palestinians and members of the Islamic nation to come to Jerusalem to join the struggle against Israel. On October 12th, 2023, so 3 years in prison for incitement. And there was a drone that was fired at Israel today over Masada, actually. I heard about it on a WhatsApp. It was intercepted, but there are drones and missiles being fired at Israel. Of course, Israel is still attacking Gaza and still attacking Lebanon. I just found out today that at the end of October, the Knesset voted and passed a bill. This was October 29th. It's aimed at preventing the establishment of a U.S. consulate to serve Palestinians in Jerusalem. So you might recall that President Biden, one of his election promises was to reopen the consulate in Jerusalem. He has not been able to do so. Instead, the Office of Palestinian Affairs reports to the State Department, but it's housed in the embassy. So that I'd encourage you to take a look at that. There have been several articles about that. There's an article talking about how the land for the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem was owned by Palestinians prior to 1948. There's an article about how it's just a consulate, why this is being raised again, why Israeli consent is needed to reopen the consulate. I know in our conversations, we've been advocating for the US to reopen the consulate, but it's been said that Israel has to provide the electricity, et cetera. There's been a lot of reasons for why the consulate could not be reopened. It's said that that was passed in the Knesset in case Kamala Harris becomes president to prevent the movement, of the embassy back to Tel Aviv or the reopening of the consulate in Jerusalem. In the West Bank, Israeli raids have been going on for the last 24, 48 hours. There have been clashes with militants, 4 Palestinians killed in the last 24 hours or so. The IDF, in a joint operation with Shin Bet, conducted an airstrike in the West Bank in the city of Jenin. They targeted a group that they described as, quote, terrorists, who used gunfire and explosives against the IDF. At least 2 Palestinians were killed. On Tuesday, a family member of one of the men told Israeli News there had been no clash with Israeli security forces and that the men who were killed were not armed. We also know 2 Palestinians were killed by Israeli fire near the village of Tamun, and the IDF and Shin Bet security forces announced the arrest of over 60 members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine in the West Bank and Lebanon over the last day or so. In Gaza, the US Secretary of State Blinken told Defense Minister Gallant, you'll recall he's no longer the defense minister, that Israel must take further action to substantially increase and sustain humanitarian aid, food, medicine, and other essential supplies to civilians across all of Gaza. This is in response, of course, to the letter from Blinken and from our Department of Defense giving 30 days for Israel to address the humanitarian crisis there and the lack of aid being allowed in. Nearly 94,000 children in Gaza have received their second dose of the polio vaccination, and more than 100 patients were evacuated from Gaza on Wednesday. I'm like, what day is it? Today's only Tuesday, so that was Wednesday of last week. Northern Gaza residents have said that the IDF dropped flyers calling on them to evacuate to the south for their own safety before Jabalia's downfall. And a U.S. Army soldier who was in critical condition after suffering non-combat injuries while supporting the military pier off the coast of Gaza has died, according to the U.S. military. The death toll in Gaza is now 43,391. An update on hostages and ceasefire. Blinken said Hamas has once again refused to release even a limited number of hostages to secure a ceasefire and relief for people of Gaza. That's a readout of a conversation Blinken had with an Egyptian source, but with the foreign minister of Egypt. And families of hostages in Israel blocked the southern highway in Tel Aviv. One of the protesters said the government that conducts psychological warfare against its own people while continuously forsaking them has no mandate to continue a war. There have been more than 1,000 buildings, 1,085 buildings that have been leveled or damaged in Lebanon. And the Lebanese people are largely united against Israel's onslaught, some in southern towns where Hezbollah does not hold sway, saying that they feel trapped by the conflict. One town's trying to stay out of it. Hezbollah has had one of their operatives abducted through an Israeli naval commando. They had an operative in a sea-to-land operation. This marked the deepest known incursion yet by Israeli forces into the Lebanese territory. I could go into more details about that raid. If you're interested, let me know, and I'll do that on Thursday. And the Lebanese government's official news agency reported that the IDF destroyed tens of thousands of houses and 30 small towns in South Lebanon since their ground offensive began in early October, so just in the last month or so. More rockets were fired from Hezbollah 55 at Israel on Tuesday, and the Saudi news agency reported airstrikes in the village of Al-Jia, south of Beirut. 3 people were killed in Lebanon on an airstrike on a car today. I mentioned some about the Iran-Israel tensions. There's fear that there will be a counterattack from Iran into Israel. U.S. Secretary of State Blinken spoke with the Iraqi Prime Minister yesterday, talking about the importance of Iraq not being drawn into regional conflict. And pro-Iranian militias in Iraq claimed responsibility for launching drones at Israel earlier today. Finally, Syrian state TV reported that Israeli aggression targeted the town of al-Qusayri. Later on Tuesday, the IDF said that the Air Force struck Hezbollah weapons depots near homes in Syria. So that is an update from today. A lot is happening. I'll continue to keep you informed. My next update will be from Amman tomorrow on Wednesday.